There is a kind of suffering that leaves no visible mark. It does not announce itself with loud crises or dramatic breakdowns. It settles in quietly, like dust on a shelf, so gradually that you stop noticing it is there. You wake up one morning and realize you have been shrinking. Not because the world forced you to, but because somewhere along the way, you decided, without ever consciously deciding, that you were worth less than you actually are. This is not a fringe experience. It is one of the most widespread and least discussed forms of human self-betrayal. And what makes it so dangerous is that it disguises itself as humility, as reasonableness, as being easy to get along with. It looks like the right thing to do. It feels like maturity. But beneath the surface, it is erosion. It is the slow, quiet collapse of a person who has forgotten what they are worth. The Stoics understood this problem with extraordinary depth. Marcus Aurelius, writing alone in his private journals, never intending them to be published, returned again and again to the question of how a person relates to their own nature. Epictetus, who had been enslaved, who had known what it meant to have every external freedom stripped away, spoke with relentless precision about the one thing no one can take from you: your judgment of yourself, your inner standard, the voice inside you that decides how much you matter. And Seneca, watching the decay of Rome's elite from the inside, diagnosed in his letters the particular sickness of people who had everything and yet lived as though they deserved nothing. What they all pointed toward, from different angles and different lives, was this: the greatest threat to a human being is not what the world does to them from the outside. It is what they do to themselves on the inside. And undervaluing yourself chronically, habitually, invisibly, is one of the most consequential things a person can do to themselves. So today, on this channel, we are going to move through 13 signs. 13 specific, recognizable patterns of thought and behavior that indicate you may be undervaluing yourself without realizing it. Not to make you feel worse, not to offer you empty reassurances, but to hold up a clear mirror in the Stoic tradition so that you can see yourself accurately and then, from that accurate seeing, make a different choice. If this kind of work matters to you, the kind that goes below the surface and actually changes how you move through the world, then subscribe to Stoic Zeno. Hit the like button if you have ever felt, even for a moment, that you might be worth more than you have been acting like. Leave a comment below and tell me which of these signs you recognize in yourself. And share this with someone who needs to hear it. Let us begin. Sign 1. You apologize for existing. There is a particular kind of person who apologizes constantly, not because they have done something genuinely wrong, but because they have been conditioned to experience their own presence as an imposition. You apologize for asking questions. You apologize for having a different opinion. You apologize for needing something. You apologize for taking up space, for speaking too long, for existing in a way that might inconvenience someone else. The apology comes out before the thought is even finished. It has become a reflex, a social lubricant, a way of preemptively shrinking yourself before the world has a chance to demand it. The Stoics had a particular sensitivity to the language we use internally and externally, because they understood that language shapes reality. When Epictetus says in the Enchiridion that we must be careful about what we call things, that calling something good or bad, important or trivial, alters how we experience it, he is pointing to the same mechanism. When you apologize for existing, you are not just being polite. You are training yourself, over and over again, to believe that your existence requires justification. Marcus Aurelius writes in Meditations that a person should do what nature requires and move on, without constantly referencing themselves, without making their own actions into a performance of apology or self-deprecation. There is a dignity in simply being what you are. Not arrogance, not aggression, but a quiet, settled ownership of your own presence. The constant apologizer has lost access to that dignity, and the loss is so gradual, so normalized, that they no longer know they are missing it. Notice this week how many times you apologize. Then ask yourself, each time, did I actually do something wrong, or am I apologizing for the crime of being here? Sign 2. You consistently place others' needs above your own to the point of erasure. There is something that looks like virtue and functions like self-destruction You give constantly. You help before being asked. You rearrange your schedule, your comfort, your priorities, your sleep, all to make sure the people around you are taken care of. And when someone asks how you are doing, you say fine, because there is no room in the conversation for your actual answer. This is not generosity in the Stoic sense. Genuine Stoic virtue, what Marcus Aurelius describes as acting for the common good, what Epictetus calls behaving with integrity toward others, does not require the deletion of the self. The Stoics made a sharp and important distinction between service that comes from abundance and service that comes from self-abandonment. One is an expression of strength. The other is an expression of the belief that you do not deserve to be served in return. Seneca addresses this in his letters directly. He writes that a person who sacrifices themselves entirely for others, who cannot receive care, who cannot state their own needs, is not being virtuous. They are being compliant. And compliance rooted in the belief that you do not matter is not a moral achievement. It is a wound dressed up as a virtue. The person who chronically overgives and underasks has generally arrived at an unconscious conclusion that love, belonging, and safety are things you earn by being useful, not things you deserve for simply being human. This conclusion, wherever it came from, is false, and acting from it, day after day, hollows you out. Ask yourself, when did you last receive care without immediately trying to repay it? When did you last state a need without attaching an apology to it? When did you last choose yourself, not out of selfishness, but out of basic self-respect? Sign 3. You minimize your accomplishments. Someone compliments your work. You immediately list the flaws. Someone praises a decision you made. You attribute it to luck, to timing, to anyone but yourself. You have done something genuinely difficult, genuinely impressive, and your first move is to make it smaller. This is so common that it is often mistaken for modesty. But there is a crucial difference between modesty and minimization. Modesty is an accurate assessment that places things in proper proportion. Minimization is a distortion. It systematically underweights your own contribution and overweights luck, circumstances, or other people's input. It is a habit of making yourself disappear from your own story. The Stoics were deeply concerned with accurate perception. Marcus Aurelius writes repeatedly about seeing things as they are, not inflated, not deflated, but clearly. He applies this principle to the external world with great rigor, but it applies equally to the internal world. Seeing yourself clearly means neither inflating your accomplishments out of vanity nor deflating them out of false humility. When Epictetus was asked how to live well, he did not say, become invisible. He said, understand what you are capable of, and act accordingly. Accurate self-assessment is not narcissism. It is the foundation of effective action. If you have worked hard, acknowledge the work. If you have made a good decision, own the decision. If you have created something real, let it be real. This is not pride in the corrupted sense. It is honesty. And honesty about your own value is exactly as important as honesty about anything else. Sign 4. You cannot accept compliments. Related to the last sign, but distinct from it. The person who undervalues themselves often cannot let a compliment land. Someone says something genuinely positive about you, and you immediately deflect it. You change the subject. You turn it back on them. You say something self-deprecating. You laugh it off. Anything but simply receiving it. This is a revealing moment, because the discomfort you feel when someone speaks well of you tells you something important about what you believe about yourself. If someone says the sky is blue and you feel no discomfort, it is because you believe it is true. If someone says you are talented, kind, or impressive, and you feel an almost physical need to contradict them, that discomfort is the gap between their perception of you and your perception of yourself. And in that gap lives your undervaluation. Seneca writes about the importance of being able to receive as well as give. A person who cannot receive, who cannot let care, praise, or support actually land, is in a constant state of defended isolation. They are unreachable, not because others are not reaching, but because they cannot allow the reach to connect. Practice this. The next time someone says something genuinely positive about you, resist the reflex. Do not deflect. Do not minimize. Simply say thank you and then let there be a moment of silence in which you allow what was said to exist without immediately dismantling it. It will feel strange. It might feel wrong. That strangeness is the feeling of the gap beginning to close. Sign 5. You set low standards for how others treat you. This is one of the most consequential signs because it determines the quality of every relationship in your life. You accept behavior from others that you would never accept for a close friend. You allow people to speak to you dismissively, to cancel on you repeatedly, to take your time without gratitude, to make promises they do not keep. And when you describe this behavior to yourself, you find explanations for it. They are stressed, they are busy, they do not mean it, it is not a big deal. The Stoics were not soft on this question. They distinguished clearly between what is in our control and what is not, but they never suggested that we are obligated to quietly absorb poor treatment from others. Epictetus is clear. You cannot control what others do, but you are absolutely responsible for what you tolerate. Tolerance is a choice. What you accept, you teach others to continue. Marcus Aurelius, in his meditations on dealing with difficult people, does not tell himself to simply endure. He does something more sophisticated. He keeps his own internal standard clear. He does not allow his inner state to be poisoned, but he also does not erase his own needs from the equation. He remains, in his word, the obstacle and the opportunity. Simultaneously, he does not collapse under poor treatment, and he does not pretend it does not exist. What you allow in your relationships is a direct expression of what you believe you deserve. And if you have been allowing treatment that a person of full self-worth would not allow, you are living out, in real time, the belief that you are worth less than others. This does not mean you become aggressive, demanding, or intolerant of human imperfection. It means you develop a floor, a minimum standard, below which you do not go, regardless of how much you care about the person on the other side of it. Sign 6. You work twice as hard for half the recognition. There is a type of person who over-delivers relentlessly and asks for almost nothing in return. They stay late, go beyond the brief, absorb the parts of projects others do not want, and do it all in near silence. And when recognition comes, if it comes, they deflect it back to the team, to circumstances, to anyone available. This pattern is partly cultural, partly psychological, and at its root, it is almost always about the same thing: the belief that in order to be worthy of a place at the table, you must earn it constantly, that you have no inherent right to be there, that the moment you stop overperforming, people will discover the truth about you, which is, in the darkest version of this belief, that you are not actually as valuable as they might have thought. The Stoics called this kind of anxiety about external validation a fundamental confusion of the will, a placing of your inner peace in the hands of others, which Epictetus argues is the primary source of human misery. Your worth, in the Stoic framework, is not established by external recognition. It is intrinsic. It comes from your reason, your integrity, your capacity to act in accordance with your nature. No amount of overperforming adds to it. No amount of under-recognition diminishes it. This does not mean you should not work hard. The Stoics were deeply committed to the idea of giving full effort to whatever you do. But there is a difference between working hard because excellence is worth pursuing for its own sake, and working hard because you are terrified of being seen as inadequate. One is virtue. The other is driven by a quiet, persistent, unexamined terror of your own insufficiency. Sign 7. You are paralyzed by the fear of being a burden. You need something. Maybe it is practical help. Maybe it is emotional support. Maybe it is just someone to listen. And you do not ask, because the moment you begin to formulate the request, another voice comes in, one that asks, almost automatically, "But is it too much? Am I asking too much? Will this be too much for them?" The fear of being a burden is one of the most socially acceptable forms of self-erasure. It is framed as consideration for others. It sounds like maturity, like emotional intelligence, like not being needy. But for many people, it is none of those things. It is the belief usually formed early, usually in an environment where needs were not welcomed, that your needs are a problem, that you, at the level of your wanting, are a problem. Seneca writes in his letters to Lucilius that friendship, real friendship, is characterized by mutual need. He argues that the person who claims to need nothing from others has not achieved freedom. They have achieved isolation. True strength, in the Stoic sense, includes the strength to be vulnerable, to ask, to receive, without experiencing those acts as evidence of weakness. The fear of being a burden keeps relationships at arm's length. It prevents real intimacy. It leaves you exhausted from carrying everything alone, while the people who would genuinely help you are kept at a distance by your silence. Your needs are not burdens. They are the normal requirements of a human being in relationship with other human beings. The person who believes they are a burden has, at the deepest level, internalized the idea that their existence is a cost rather than a gift. Sign 8. You dismiss your own intuition and judgment. You know something. You feel it clearly. And then someone else, a louder voice, a more confident person, someone with a title or a track record, says something different, and you immediately begin to doubt yourself. You restructure your thinking to accommodate theirs. You tell yourself you were probably wrong. Sometimes this is appropriate. Updating your beliefs in response to new evidence and perspectives is rational. But there is a pattern that goes beyond rational. Updating a reflexive discounting of your own inner knowing, simply because someone else holds a different position with more confidence. This is not open-mindedness. It is epistemic self-abandonment. Marcus Aurelius is blunt on this point. He writes about the importance of the rational faculty, the capacity to reason, to observe, to draw conclusions, and he treats that faculty as sacred, not infallible, but sacred. It is the thing in you that is most genuinely yours. To abandon it every time it meets resistance is not humility. It is a failure of self-respect at the level of the mind. Epictetus makes the same point from a different angle. He says that the only thing truly ours is our judgment, our reasoning, our capacity to assess what is true. If we surrender that to every external authority, we have surrendered the only thing that was actually ours to begin with. You are allowed to know things. You are allowed to trust what you perceive. You are allowed to maintain a position under pressure. If that position was formed through genuine thought and honest observation, the person who never trusts their own judgment is not being careful. They are being invisible. Sign 9. You feel guilty for wanting more. There is a ceiling you have placed over your own ambition. Not a ceiling imposed by circumstance or by genuine scarcity, but an internal one, a quiet conviction that wanting more than you currently have is somehow wrong, greedy, ungrateful, presumptuous. So you settle for the salary that is just enough, for the relationship that is functional but not fulfilling, for the life that is fine but not fully alive. And when you notice the gap between what you have and what you actually want, the response is not determination. It is guilt. The Stoics made a precise distinction here that is essential to understand. They distinguished between preferred indifference, things like health, wealth, good relationships, meaningful work, which are genuinely worth pursuing, and true goods, which are things like virtue, wisdom, and integrity, which alone constitute real flourishing. The Stoic is not indifferent to preferred indifference. They pursue them. They want them. They work toward them. They simply do not make their inner peace contingent on receiving them. This is entirely different from believing that wanting them is wrong. Wanting more meaning, more connection, more contribution, more beauty, more depth, is not a character flaw. It is the natural expression of a human being who has not yet given up on their own potential. The person who feels guilty for wanting more has, at the unconscious level, decided that their desires do not deserve to exist. Desires do not need to be suppressed in the Stoic framework. They need to be examined, purified of mere vanity and ego. And then, if they are aligned with your genuine nature and deepest values, pursued with full commitment and without apology. Sign 10. You use self-deprecating humor as a shield. You make jokes about yourself before others can. You are the first one to point out your flaws, your mistakes, your limitations. You preempt criticism by offering yourself up as the punchline. And you call it humor. Call it not taking yourself too seriously. Call it just being real. Some self-deprecating humor is healthy and genuinely funny. The Stoics were not humorless. Marcus Aurelius has moments of dry, cutting wit in his meditations. But there is a specific pattern that is not humor, it is armor. It is the person who has learned that if they attack themselves first, they control the terms of their own diminishment. The function of this pattern is to manage rejection. If I say the negative thing about myself before you can, I take away your power to hurt me with it. If I make myself the joke, your laughter is on my terms. There is a kind of painful control in that, but the cost is enormous. You spend your life volunteering for diminishment. You become, through your own choice, the person who confirms the worst things you believe about yourself in public, over and over again. Seneca writes about the dignity of a person who knows their own worth, not with pride, but with simple, grounded recognition. Such a person does not need to diminish themselves to be liked. They do not need to offer up their flaws as a social lubricant. They can exist fully, and if others do not approve, they can absorb that disapproval without letting it rewrite who they are. The chronic self-deprecator does not believe they are good enough to exist in the world without constantly pre-justifying their presence through self-attack. Sign 11. You mistake chronic exhaustion for dedication. You are tired all the time. Not the good tired of honest effort and full engagement, the hollow, grinding tired of a person who has not set a boundary in so long they have forgotten they are allowed to. You say yes to everything. You take on more than your share. You stay available when you should be unavailable. You give your time, your attention, your energy to anyone who asks and some who do not. And when the exhaustion becomes unbearable, you frame it as dedication, as being a hard worker, as being needed. But underneath the framing is the truth. You do not believe your energy is worth protecting. You do not believe you are allowed to say no without losing the approval that holds your sense of worth in place. So you run yourself down, quietly, continuously, and call it virtue. The Stoics were deeply practical about energy. Seneca's letters are full of passages urging his readers to be selective about where they give their time and attention, not out of selfishness, but out of the recognition that a person who squanders their inner resources has nothing left for the things that actually matter. He writes that we must defend our time with the same ferocity we would defend our property, because time, and by extension, attention and energy, is actually more precious. Your energy is not infinite. Your time is not infinite. Your attention is not infinite. Every yes is a no to something else. And the person who treats their own energy as though it costs nothing has, at the foundation, decided that they cost nothing. This is a sign. It is the body's way of showing you the bill for a belief you have been carrying for a long time. Sign 12. You struggle to charge what you are worth, or ask for what you deserve. This sign manifests differently across contexts, but the core is the same. When the moment comes to state your value in concrete terms, to name your price, to ask for the raise, to state what you need in the relationship, to establish the terms of an agreement that reflects your actual contribution, you feel a pull toward lowering the number, softening the ask, finding a way to make yourself cheaper. The moment of naming your price is a moment of vulnerability, because it is the moment when you hold up a number and say, "This is what I think I am worth." And if the world says no, or hesitates, or looks surprised, that feels like confirmation of the thing you feared was true all along. So you lower the number preemptively to avoid the potential rejection of a higher one. But what you are actually doing is confirming the fear yourself. You are being the first person to say you are worth less. Epictetus speaks about the choices we make before the choice is made, the preparations, the prejudgments, the way we condition ourselves before entering a situation. The person who walks into a negotiation already convinced they will be rejected or that their ask is too much is not negotiating. They are performing a pre-scripted story in which they already know they will lose. True Stoic preparation is the opposite of this. It is going in with a clear, rational assessment of what you have actually contributed, what you actually need, and what is actually fair, and holding that assessment without apology, not aggressively, not anxiously, but with the calm, grounded certainty of a person who knows what they are worth, because they have done the honest work of finding out. Sign 13. You believe, at some level, that you must earn the right to be loved. We come now to the root sign, the one from which many of the others grow. Somewhere in your operating system, beneath the conscious level, there is a belief that love, real love, consistent love, love that stays, is conditional, that it is something you must deserve, that it must be earned through your usefulness, your achievements, your behavior, your willingness to manage yourself in a way that makes you acceptable. That if you stopped performing, stopped delivering, stopped making yourself palatable and helpful and available, the love would stop too. This belief, wherever it came from, is the engine beneath chronic self-undervaluation. Because if love is conditional, then everything you do must be oriented toward maintaining the conditions. You cannot afford to be fully yourself, because the full self might not meet the conditions. You cannot afford to have needs, because needs might make you unlovable. You cannot afford to set limits, because limits might cost you the approval that your worth depends on. The Stoics did not use the language of love in quite the way we do now. But Marcus Aurelius returned, constantly, to a concept that functions in the same space. The idea that your worth is intrinsic, that it comes from your nature as a rational, social being from the logos, the reason, the inner principle that constitutes who you are. It is not given by others. It is not revoked by others. It does not need to be earned. Epictetus, writing from within the actual experience of enslavement, the most extreme possible external stripping of worth, makes the same point with even greater force. He says that no one can take from you what is genuinely yours, and what is genuinely yours includes the ground of your own being, the simple, irreducible fact that you are here, that you exist, that you have a nature and a rational capacity, and an inner life that belongs to no one else. You do not have to earn the right to be loved. You never did. The belief that you do was given to you by circumstances that did not accurately reflect your actual value. And carrying that belief forward, acting from it, shaping your entire life around it, is the most consequential form of self-undervaluation there is. Now that we have named the signs, we must ask what the Stoic response looks like. Because the Stoic tradition does not offer comfort without demand. It does not say you are enough in a way designed to let you off the hook. It says, see clearly, see accurately, and then act from that accuracy with full commitment. The Stoic response to undervaluation begins with what Marcus Aurelius calls prosos, attention to oneself. Not self-obsession, not self-criticism, but careful, honest, ongoing attention to the beliefs you are actually operating from, versus the beliefs you say you hold. If you say you believe in your own worth, but you apologize for existing, your behavior is showing you what you actually believe. If you say you know you deserve good treatment, but you accept poor treatment, your choices are showing you what you actually believe. The Stoic practice of self-examination is specifically designed to close the gap between the beliefs we profess and the beliefs we live. The second move is what Epictetus calls converting the obstacle, taking the thing that has been a limitation and making it the source of new capacity. Every sign of self-undervaluation, once recognized, becomes a lever. The moment you see that you are apologizing for existing, you can choose differently. The moment you see that you are shrinking in order to avoid rejection, you have the option of expanding. And the third move is the most demanding: consistency. Stoicism is not a single insight. It is a practice. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations over years, the same themes, the same struggles, the same reminders to himself, again and again, because he knew that a single moment of clarity does not rewire a habitual pattern. What rewires a habitual pattern is the daily, disciplined, unglamorous work of choosing differently, one choice at a time, for as long as it takes. You have arrived at the end of this video, and I want to say something to you directly, not as a generic statement for any viewer, but as something I mean specifically for the person who recognized themselves in what we have been through today. The fact that you undervalue yourself is not a character flaw. It is not evidence that something is fundamentally wrong with you. It is, in most cases, the predictable result of circumstances that taught you through repetition, through consequence, through the pressure of environments that were not designed with your full flourishing in mind, that you were worth less than you are. Those circumstances were real. The lessons they taught you were powerful, but they were wrong. And you are now, having read the evidence available to you, your own patterns, your own behavior, your own recurring experiences, in a position to arrive at a different conclusion. The Stoics did not believe in sudden transformation. They believed in sustained, rational, daily commitment to becoming more accurately what you already are. Not adding something foreign, not becoming someone different. Removing the layers of wrong belief, wrong habit, wrong conclusion, until what remains is the person who was always there, in full possession of their own worth, moving through the world accordingly. That person exists in you. They have always existed in you. The work is not creation, it is excavation. If this video moved something in you, if any of these 13 signs landed with the weight of recognition, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below. Tell me which sign you recognized. Tell me what you are going to do differently. Your comment matters, not just to me, but to the person who will read it and recognize that they are not alone. Subscribe to Stoic Zeno if you are not already part of this community. We go deep here. We do not offer quick fixes or motivational noise. We offer what the Stoics offered: rigorous, honest, applicable wisdom for the task of living well. Every week, we go further in. Like this video if it gave you something real. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. The person in your life who gives everything and asks for nothing, who apologizes before they speak, who has been quietly shrinking for longer than either of you have noticed. This is Stoic Zeno. The work continues, and so do you.